On a freezing night in late December, a general who had already lost New York, lost Long Island, and watched his army shrink from 20,000 men to barely 5,000, made a decision that should have ended in disaster. He crossed an ice-choked river in the dark, marched through a snowstorm, and attacked before dawn. If he failed, the American Revolution was almost certainly over. Most historians agree on that point. What almost nobody stops to ask is a stranger question. Why did the most powerful military machine on Earth ever let it get that far in the first place? Because here's the part that gets buried under the fireworks and the flags. Britain did not lose America because it was weak. In 1776, Britain had the largest navy in the world, a professional army, immense wealth, and colonies that only a few years earlier had been among the most loyal in the empire. So what changed? What turned obedient subjects into rebels willing to face cannon fire? The answer starts, strangely enough, with a war Britain won. In 1763, Britain crushed France in a global conflict that handed it control of nearly all of North America, east of the Mississippi. Victory should have meant security. Instead, it left London holding a staggering debt and a newly expanded map it had no cheap way to defend. Someone had to pay for that war. British leaders looked across the Atlantic and decided the colonists should. That single decision set off a chain reaction nobody in London fully saw coming. Taxes arrived one after another. Stamps, glass, tea, paper, each one small on its own, each one framed in London as reasonable. But the colonists noticed something else entirely. They were being taxed by a parliament they had never voted for. No colonial representative sat in that chamber. A phrase began circulating in taverns and print shops up and down the coast. Quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Taxation without representation. It was not just a complaint about money. It was a question about power. And once colonists started asking it, they could not stop.
By 1770, tension had a body count. British soldiers, jeered and pelted by a Boston crowd, opened fire, killing 5 civilians. Colonial newspapers printed the story before the facts were even settled, and the massacre became a symbol long before it became history. 3 years later came an act of deliberate, theatrical defiance. Colonists dumped an entire shipment of British tea into Boston Harbor rather than pay the tax on it. London's response was not caution, it was punishment. Parliament passed a set of laws so harsh the colonists simply called them the Intolerable Acts, shutting down Boston's port and stripping Massachusetts of self-government. Here is the twist most people miss. Britain's crackdown was meant to isolate Massachusetts and frighten the other colonies into obedience. It did the opposite. Colonies that had barely spoken to each other, suspicious rivals more than allies, suddenly found common cause. In 1774, delegates from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Britain had accidentally united the very people it was trying to divide.
Still, war was not yet inevitable. Even after Congress convened, most delegates were not calling for independence. They wanted their rights as Englishmen restored. But in April 1775, British troops marched toward Concord to seize colonial weapons, and shots rang out at Lexington. Nobody has ever definitively established who fired first, and the war that almost nobody wanted had already begun. So the Empire sent its army to crush what it assumed was a disorganized rebellion. That assumption was the second fatal miscalculation. British generals expected quick, decisive battles. What they got was a war stretched across an ocean, fought on unfamiliar terrain, against an enemy that often refused to fight the way European armies expected. Supply lines took months to cross the Atlantic. Every reinforcement, every barrel of gunpowder had to survive a journey that could be delayed by weather, by distance, by chance. Then, in the summer of 1776, came the moment that changed everything, and not because of a battle. In Philadelphia, delegates approved a document declaring the colonies free and independent states.
built on the argument that legitimate government draws its power from the consent of the governed, not from a distant crown. It was a radical claim, and it meant there was no going back. Compromise was no longer an option. Only victory or total defeat remained, and victory looked far from certain. That winter, George Washington's army was collapsing. Enlistments were expiring. Desertion was rampant. This is the exact moment we started with. A broken army crossing an icy river on Christmas night, attacking a garrison of sleeping mercenaries at Trenton, because Washington understood something his enemies did not. He did not need to defeat the British Empire. He only needed to survive long enough to make giving up more expensive than continuing to fight. That single insight explains almost everything that followed. Britain's real defeat came not on a battlefield, but in a calculation. When France, still bitter from its own loss in 1763, entered the war on the American side in 1778, Britain was no longer fighting a colonial uprising. It was fighting a global war against its oldest rival, with American independence as the price of ending it. By 1781, at Yorktown, a British army surrendered while its band reportedly played a tune whose title said everything. The world turned upside down. An empire that had never lost to a colony had just been undone, not by superior force, but by an underestimated determination it never took seriously enough, and by its own decisions, made years earlier in rooms in London where nobody imagined an ocean away a new nation was about to be born, from the very laws meant to keep it obedient. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe this channel and press the bell icon